Grand Seiko, my dear Grand Seiko. Probably the first insider watch brand that I really fell in love with. 10 years ago, even a lot of collectors didn't know about Grand Seiko, and those of us who did, we felt like lucky ones. But it seems like a lot of that has changed, and I'm happy that this great watchmaker gets the recognition I've always thought it deserved. Because, I was into Grand Seiko before it was cool. And maybe it won't ever be a household name like some Swiss brands, but I've definitely seen a growing acknowledgement from even the most Eurocentric watch nerds that Grand Seiko is grand. For real, I think all of the Richard Mille owners I personally know are familiar with the word Zaratsu, which means they have at least two things to be embarrassed about. And as part of its growth a couple years ago, Grand Seiko started the Evolution 9 collection with watches like the White Birch, which is a watch that everyone loses their damn mind about. Everyone but me. And that's because I'm still not sure about this Evolution 9 stuff. And that includes this SLGA021 Lake Suwa watch. The Evolution 9 watches are thoughtful and aesthetically consistent, but I've got some problems with this collection. Because not only is it easy to criticize someone's hard work, but it's fun too. Case in point, YouTube comments. What makes this watch unique, or at least interesting, is the dial. And it's been really difficult to capture this in photos and video, so I hope it's coming through here. Grand Seiko calls this watch a Lake Suwa watch. Lake Suwa is a body of water near the studio where Grand Seiko creates all its spring drive watches. And it must be an amazingly deep lake because otherwise it would be empty from all the inspiration Grand Seiko is taking from it. But it seems like a lovely place, and for once, I agree that this dial looks like its namesake. Water. Deep water. That's what this dial looks like to me. In most lights, the dial looks like a deep navy blue. But if you're able to get the right angle, you can see this really gorgeous, semi-glossy, horizontal wave texture. Grand Seiko says this watch is, quote, inspired by the serene body of water, featuring a dark blue dial that recalls gently lapping waves along the water surface just before dawn. Okay, and even though I find that marketing a bit much, this does seem pretty accurate. Grand Seiko just makes great dials. That's not news, but it's nice to see yet another one. Other than the dial, the SLGA021, it's a lot like the other time and date Evolution 9 watches. It's 40 millimeters across, 47.9 millimeters long, and 11.8 millimeters thick. It has 22 millimeter lugs and a water resistance of 100 meters, and it has a screw-down crown. This steel watch weighs 166 grams on this bracelet, and it lists for $9,100. Yes, you all know my wrist is 7 inches in circumference, but that does not take into account the 159 evenly dispersed hairs under this watch, with an average maximum angle of 3 degrees and an average thickness of 72 microns. The case is a pretty great size on my moderately sized and moderately hairy wrist. 40 by 48 by 12, very nice for a sports watch. But I referred to the size of the case and not the size of the watch for a specific reason, and here's where we get to my first criticism of the Evolution 9 watches: the bracelet width. One of the principles of this collection of watches is that the bracelet should be at least half the width of the case. And for whatever reason, Grand Seiko decided that 22 millimeters would be better than 20 millimeters on a 40 millimeter case, and I'm not sure that I agree with that. What I am sure about is that I'd prefer a bracelet that tapered more. This goes from 22 millimeters at the lugs to 20 millimeters at the clasp. So it does taper a bit, but I just think it would look more elegant and wear better with a little more dramatic taper. Maybe 22 to 18, or, 20 to 18. All this is to say that the watch might feel a little larger than some 40mm sports watches, and that's because the bracelet is just a little wider at the case and a little wider at the clasp. And that's also why I think this watch could and should be a little lighter. 166 grams isn't terrible. It's about the same as a Rolex Submariner on a bracelet, but this Grand Seiko has less water resistance and uses what has got to be a lighter movement, so I attribute some of that extra weight to the wide bracelet. And even with this heavy-ish bracelet and no micro adjustment system in the clasp, I've been able to find a really good fit using the half links that come with this bracelet. It feels really good to me. The light movement is the 9RA2 spring drive movement. It's a heck of a thing. 120 hours of power reserve, that's 5 days, and an accuracy of better than half a second per day. Grand Seiko actually says about 10 seconds per month. How is this accuracy possible? Well, that's one of the benefits of the spring drive movement. Spring drive is a proprietary Grand Seiko technology, or more likely a Seiko technology. It does show up in some higher-end non-Grand Seiko watches. Like a traditional mechanical watch movement, a spring drive stores energy in a spring. It's driven by a spring drive. But unlike a purely mechanical movement, it uses an electronic method for releasing the energy from the spring, kind of like how YouTube is an electronic method for taking away my own energy. The spring drive uses a quartz crystal for regulating time and an electromagnetic braking mechanism for slowly releasing that spring energy. This is how the spring drive movement can be so accurate, and this is also why the spring drive movements don't tick, they glide. The energy is released slowly and consistently and beautifully. There aren't many watches in the world with a perfectly sweeping seconds hand, and I think that kinetic design is an underrated element of Grand Seiko watches like this. Sure, they look good in photos, but I think watching that seconds hand glide is really part of the design. And in this watch, I think it fits with this graceful aesthetic. Okay, a watch video said the word aesthetic, so everyone take a drink. Everything under this sapphire crystal is exact and pristine. I even feel bad that I don't have the photographic equipment to capture it all accurately. And by equipment, I mean patience and time. Those are two pieces of my gear that I really need to upgrade. All the markers are chamfered and have very finely cut ridges on their tops. All these elements help make the markers pretty visible in almost any light or angle. Almost any light or angle, but not in the dark, and that's because this does not have any lume, and that's a miss, I think. Most of the Evolution 9 watches don't have lume. None of the time and date watches have lume, and I think they should. These are sporty enough, with 100 meters of water resistance and steel bracelets, and actually pretty rugged movements. The GMT and the chronographs do have lume, so why not this one? Maybe, if someone went and put bioluminescent algae in Lake Suwa, maybe then Grand Seiko would feel inspired to add lume to this dial, but don't do that. Introducing invasive flora to a body of water so you can see your luxury watch in a movie theater, probably not worth it. And while I'm complaining, the hour hand. I really wish it came to a single point. Other Grand Seiko hands do, in fact this minute hand does, and I just think it looks more elegant. But I do credit Grand Seiko for listening to its audience, because there's something missing on this dial, and that's the power reserve indicator. For years, it seemed unlikely that we'd ever see a regular production spring drive watch without a power reserve indicator on the dial. It just wasn't done. And it bothered a lot of people. I never really minded much, but now, seeing spring drive watches with clean dials, this is pretty good. Maybe you noticed earlier, the power reserve indicator still exists, but it's on the movement, and it looks amazing. In fact, the entire movement looks great to me. There are no stripes or perlage, just a matte finish with polished chamfers. Between those, the blued screws, the synthetic rubies, and the brass elements, man, I really like how this looks. Grand Seiko dials and Grand Seiko movements exceed nearly anything else below $10,000. The movements usually aren't finished in the same style as many European watches, but they're always done really well in their own style. For that price, $9,100, that's a whole bunch of dollars. And there's a lot of competition at this price. Imagine if you had $9,000 to spend on a watch. Would this watch be the one? I'll tell you what, anecdotally, a lot of people are saying yes to this price and the Evolution 9 watches. I know a Zaratsu of people who bought these watches. Oh yeah, Zaratsu is the name Grand Seiko gives to its polishing process, but it's also the collective noun for a group of Grand Seiko collectors, a Zaratsu of collectors. I just made that up, but now it's official. And so yeah, it seems like Grand Seiko is striking the right notes with these new watches and the new prices. And even though I've expressed some issues with Grand Seiko and specifically this new collection, I'm happy to see that people like these. If I thought these watches weren't worth the money or were poorly made, I'd be trying to convince people to stay away. But that's definitely not the case. I've never met a Grand Seiko watch that didn't impress me in some positive way. And that's been my experience for a decade or more because, and never forget this, I was into Grand Seiko before it was cool.